To what extent Max Verstappen in a future that seemed absolutely certain, but now is not so much indeed, and George Russell can trigger a new game of musical chairs next year? The biggest in the history of Formula One, because you might remember in '94, 14 spots were open, and a lot happened. Many people switched places, and some stayed where they were. And then everyone thought in 2025 everything will be fine, nothing too extraordinary will happen, right? Maybe not. And that's what we're going to talk about today on Splash and Go, about how Verstappen and a possible early departure from Red Bull could trigger another domino effect. Let's go then. The silly season, the rumor season of Formula One. Silly in English, nonsense, foolishness, silly, depending on how you use it to describe something, is already in full swing at this point in the championship. I am recording this video on April 30th, Wednesday night. Tomorrow, the schedule for the Miami Grand Prix begins. Normally, the silly season peaks around July. During the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, and everything indicated that this year things would be calmer. Many teams, several of them at the top, have their lineup settled. Ferrari with Hamilton and Leclerc, McLaren with Piastri and Norris. Red Bull has a contract with Max Verstappen until 2028. Mercedes has Antonelli and Russell, and in theory, could keep this duo. But practically all Formula One contracts have performance clauses and clauses that allow a driver to leave if they are requested by a top team. Why am I saying this? Because the departure of Verstappen from Red Bull and Russell from Mercedes could open spots for other drivers in teams at the back who are keeping an eye on opportunities at the front. For example, Carlos Sainz. Have you already understood the magnitude that things are taking on? Exactly. Is Max Verstappen considering leaving Red Bull? If so, where to? Is he considering a sabbatical year? That could also be an option. Is it true that Red Bull is considering, in the event of losing Verstappen, replacing him with someone from Mercedes, George Russell? Although things don't seem as explosive as last year, when the grenade pin was pulled when Lewis Hamilton suddenly announced he was going to Ferrari, catching all of Formula One, starting with his employer Mercedes, weren't off guard. There is definitely potential for surprises this year, and the scenario next year might come to us quite different from the current one. Most of the focus is on Max Verstappen. Everyone, as he himself said, talks about where I'm going, about my potential team change, except me. That was the gist of a response he recently gave when asked for the umpteenth time if he would leave, and he said, "My focus is on improving my car. My focus is on working with the team. Everyone talks about my future, except me." Unrelated or not to Verstappen's future, there is the situation of another driver who is possibly having his best season in Formula One so far, George Russell. Russell debuted in Formula One in 2019 as a Mercedes protégé, being brought to the main team first with 3 years of development at Williams in 2019, 2020, 2021. In 2022, he moves up to the team, partners with Lewis Hamilton, and outperforms the 7-time champion 2-1. He was ahead in 22, 24, and behind in 23. This year, he leads the team as the experienced guy, since alongside him is the rookie Kimi Antonelli, who has barely turned 18 and hasn't completed half a dozen Grand Prix races. And although for Mercedes it would be natural to keep him, the truth is that with a contract ending at the end of 2025, he is potentially a name available on the market. A name available, and at the moment, highly valued. On the Red Bull front, Helmut Marko was the first to say that the team is indeed concerned about the possibility of losing Max Verstappen, which he denies, as we have already mentioned. But this is the first rule for a story to gain traction in Formula One. A denial, and in this case we have two. Christian Horner, the team principal, has already come forward to say that he is sure Max Verstappen will be in one of their cars in 2026. And Verstappen has already quoted here, Oz said he does not discuss this matter. But does he not discuss this matter with the press? Or is he not discussing this matter with anyone, not even with someone offering him a contract? What Verstappen thinks about his future could be irrelevant since he has a contract until 2028. But this is where a key point in this discussion comes in. A performance clause. Normally, you only hear about a performance clause when a driver is performing very poorly, as for example, the performance clause was triggered with Sergio Perez to let him go from Red Bull last year and many other times. But the fact is that there are also performance clauses for drivers to leave teams, and as far as we know, there is a performance clause for Verstappen with the team determining that if by the summer break, or in August, he is not second in the Drivers' Championship and the team is not third in the Constructors' Championship, we don't know if one, the other, both, or at least one of them, he would be in control of his own contract. He would be what they call a free agent. He would be free, loose in the market, and could leave through the front door of Red Bull without paying a cent and without being obliged to pay for utilities or valet. And if he has this clause in hand, he can indeed exercise it. It doesn't mean the contract becomes null. It simply means that Verstappen would have the option to fulfill it or not, leaving the decision up to him. This timeline up until the August break, the summer break, always remembering summer in the Northern Hemisphere, here we will be in winter, is the reason why the heat of these conversations isn't bubbling. When we get to July, why it will be the only topic of conversation, unless something happens before then. But what could happen before then? Knowing that a Verstappen could be free on the market, neither Toto Wolff nor Lawrence Stroll would make premature decisions, which means that once again, a driver will hold up the market until the moment they make their decision. As happened in 2024 with Carlos Sainz, who had offers from Alpine, Williams, and Sauber, which became Audi, on the table, and only after he decided did the dominoes start to fall. But Sainz last year didn't do this out of spite. He did this because he was waiting for another driver to decide. The same driver this year, Max Verstappen, who, at the height of the Hornergate, the sexual scandal involving the Red Bull boss, considered leaving. What would be Max Verstappen's options on the table at that moment? Realistically, we're talking about 3 teams. Although, similar to Ayrton Senna's situation in 1992, he can naturally talk to any of the teams on the grid, or almost all, since Ferrari and McLaren are signed, and for them, drivers are not an issue at the moment. 1. Red Bull. With Red Bull, he already has a contract, wouldn't need to negotiate anything, renew anything, or change any document. And Red Bull places its hopes on the change in the technical directive now in Barcelona, which foresees a tightening. It's paradoxical to say this about flexible wings in the FIA's inspection parameters for these bending wings. Red Bull hopes, waits, prays that this will take away little performance from Mercedes, and especially McLaren, thus helping them to close the gap to the front. The gap to the front, which is important to emphasize, sometimes doesn't even exist. Words from Christian Horner after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This weekend, we had the fastest car. This might bother some who like to say that Verstappen has the 4th best car on the grid, but this topic has varied a lot from track to track. The so-called track sensitive. In other words, depending on the track, the Red Bull car is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and sometimes it's true, 4th. The problem with this belief about Red Bull is that the technical directive tightening the rule and the inspection of flexible wings was published in December. And since then, all 10 teams have had time to study the rule and will show up in Barcelona with cars adapted to it. So everyone imagines it must change everything to change nothing. But Christian Horner and his technical director Pierre Wache have the right to believe, don't they? However, Red Bull presents other uncertainties. They lost Adrian Newey to Aston Martin, and next year will bring a power unit from Red Bull Powertrains Ford, a homemade engine that always represents a huge challenge. Rodrigo, but a new engine isn't new for everyone. Isn't it a challenge for Mercedes, Audi, Ferrari? Yes, but you must agree with me that these 3 mentioned, along with Honda, have been making engines for, I don't know, a century each. And Red Bull Powertrains with Ford is going to start now. Well, but Ford will basically conduct research on energy recovery systems, but the engine will be made in a factory next to the Red Bull factory in Milton Keynes, England. These uncertainties are the reason why Verstappen might be looking at the neighbor's grass, or in this case, 2 neighbors. Mercedes is one that would certainly be interested in having his services with a history of producing good cars and excellent engines. And the buzz in the paddock over the last 2 years suggests that in the transition to the new rule, Mercedes will once again excel as it did in 2014, which will benefit its clients as well as itself, Williams and Alpine. And then, if you were Toto Wolff faced with the possibility of having Verstappen knowing that George Russell might not have anywhere to go, or imagining that putting the brakes on and waiting for Verstappen to decide could indeed be an option while waiting to see what comes next, especially knowing that if Russell, for example, signs with Aston Martin, unable to wait and unable to handle the uncertainty, if he can't count on Max Verstappen, he might end up with Williams, Carlos Sainz, who now seems to have started performing well. Therefore, for Verstappen, a very promising option would be Mercedes, but not the only one, because Aston Martin has Adrian Newey, a brand new factory, all the money in the world to make him an excellent offer if they haven't already. And they will have Honda engines for 2026. This entire package could attract Max Verstappen, who would then prefer to work with Newey, work with Honda, earn a fortune, and distance himself from the uncertainties of Red Bull Powertrains Ford. It would then be necessary to understand what the outcomes of each of these options would be. Because if Verstappen leaves Red Bull, who would Carlos Sainz take his place? Alonso to do one last year as a stopgap? Pierre Gasly? And if Verstappen leaves Red Bull, where would he go? Because that determines another outcome. If he leaves Red Bull to go to Mercedes, Russell would be out of a job. He could go to Red Bull or to Aston Martin. If Verstappen leaves Red Bull for Aston Martin, could Russell stay at Mercedes? Could Russell go to Red Bull? Could Sainz leave Williams? There are many options. And Sainz was one of the drivers who wisely conditioned his move with exit clauses, obviously putting it in writing. I haven't read it, but he wouldn't be foolish not to do so, allowing him to leave Williams if this, and that team all ranked higher than Williams in the constructors call him. It's cruel, but that's how it goes. And as history shows all these clauses being used in the past, we must assume they still exist. If Verstappen goes to Aston Martin leaving Red Bull, what will happen to Fernando Alonso? It's hard to believe we would have a duo with both of them because it wouldn't last half an hour. Would Verstappen and Stroll be the duo? Or would Daddy Lawrence's investors say, we're investing this fortune, now we need 2 drivers and not 1.3? But that's not all, because Alpine has a structure that knows how to make at least decent cars, consistently hitting good updates, and it will also be a Mercedes customer in 2026. And recently, Ralf Schumacher said, Flavio Briatore has all the traits to consider bringing Max Verstappen, as he never thought small and knows how to make a team win, although sometimes a bit outside the rules. Russell is currently in a surreal situation of experiencing his peak in Formula One, driving superbly, extracting everything possible from the car, 4th in the Drivers' Championship, has already been on the podium, has led races, etc. And is at risk of losing his seat next year. And for all intents and purposes, he doesn't have a contract for 2026, so he will have to act quickly. He will have to do something. And doing something might involve Lawrence, Christian Horner, Briatore. Do you have a seat for next year? I don't want to live with this uncertainty. I'm going to pull an Alexander Albon. Why am I saying this? Because last year, in the midst of all this turmoil, Albon was one of those who quickly signed with Williams and removed his name from the chaos. Furdunzo is an expression we use in my family. I don't know if in my city to define chaos. Anyway, you understood me. Who is going where? Is Verstappen staying at Red Bull? And if he leaves Aston Martin, Mercedes, or I don't know, Alpine, and Russell, and Sainz, and Pierre Gasly, what could happen in 2026? Because certainly something is going to end up happening. And we who thought we would have a calm season and that the action would be concentrated only on the track might once again have a game of musical chairs with fewer chairs, but with music still very, well, lively. Comment down below. So this was another episode of Splash and Go. I hope you all enjoyed it. Leave a like, it's free, it costs nothing. You know, it really helps the channel a lot. Do me this favor, do us this favor, because there's no point in me making videos here without you interacting there, watching until the end, leaving your hype and your comment. any comment, a little emoji up, down, a smile, anything. Tell us the city you're watching from. Have you told us? Tell us the city where you were born. It doesn't matter. For the algorithm, anything is engagement. And that's how it keeps distributing our content across the internet. That's how we're aiming for 300,000 subscribers after reaching 200,000 just a couple of months ago. To make sure you don't miss anything we publish here, we have notification channels, Telegram, WhatsApp, and Instagram, where you receive a push notification on your phone as soon as I publish each piece of content here. Finally, but not least, we have our social media, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, and TikTok, where there's content all the time. The handles are being shown here, and the links are down below in the description. Finally, and I've been forgetting to mention this, but our number of subscribers keeps growing. We have a subscriber program. Join button or become a member, link down below in the description. Everyone watches the videos in Premiere, has priority response in live sessions, and enters giveaways here during the last live session of the month, every month of the season. 3 books from Gulliver Publishing, 3 miniatures from the Formula Collection, and there's more coming soon. Alright, so that's it. Thanks, and a big hug.